Hi, my name is Jazmin, and at my sister's wedding reception, surrounded by 300 guests in designer gowns and $1,000 suits, she grabbed the microphone during her maid of honor speech and said, "Unlike some people in this family, David and I actually made something of ourselves. We're not pathetic losers living in studio apartments, bouncing from one failed job to another." Her eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom as she smiled that perfect, practiced smile she'd worn since childhood. What she didn't know was that her boss, Mr. Harrison, had just walked through those mahogany doors, and when he saw me sitting at table 12, his face went completely white before he walked straight over and bowed deeply in front of everyone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Desert Rose Country Club in Scottsdale had never looked more beautiful than it did that October evening. Golden hour light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a warm amber glow that made even the most ordinary guest look like they belonged in a magazine spread. The venue cost more than most people make in a year, but Rebecca had insisted it was the only place sophisticated enough for her vision of the perfect wedding. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Each table was adorned with arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And a 12-piece orchestra played soft jazz, while guests sipped champagne that cost $50 a glass. I sat at table 12, strategically placed far enough from the head table to be easily forgotten, but close enough that I couldn't claim I hadn't been included. My dress was a simple navy blue number I'd found at a department store, marked down twice, and still more than I should have spent. Around me, guests wore designer labels and jewelry that caught the light with every gesture. I felt like an impostor in my own family's celebration, but that feeling wasn't new. It had been my companion for most of my 28 years. My mother, Susan, looked radiant in her mother-of-the-bride dress, a pale pink silk creation that complemented her perfectly styled silver hair. She moved through the crowd like a gracious hostess, accepting compliments on Rebecca's beauty, the venue's elegance, and her own impeccable taste in planning. My father, Robert, stood proudly beside David's parents, discussing golf handicaps and investment portfolios, with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. Rebecca had outdone herself tonight. Her wedding dress was a custom creation that had taken 8 months and cost more than some people's cars. Every detail was perfect, from her professionally applied makeup that would photograph beautifully in any light, to her hair styled in an elaborate updo that had taken 3 hours to create. She looked exactly like what she was: successful, beautiful, and completely in control of her narrative. David stood beside her in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the corporate attorney he was. They made a stunning couple, the kind that graced the society pages of magazines. Harvard Law graduates, both of them, working at prestigious firms, living in a penthouse downtown with views of Camelback Mountain. They were the golden couple our parents had always dreamed of having. I picked at my salmon dinner, watching the festivities unfold around me. Alex, my boyfriend of 2 years, had wanted to come with me tonight, but I'd told him it was better if he didn't. Family weddings were complicated enough without having to explain why my sister introduced me as Jazmin, who's still figuring things out, while she introduced our cousins as Mark, the emergency room physician, and Sarah, who just made partner at her accounting firm. The truth was more complicated than anyone in this room knew, but I'd learned long ago that my family preferred simple narratives. Rebecca was the success story, the daughter who had exceeded every expectation. I was the cautionary tale, the one who had chosen passion over practicality, and was still paying the price. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Growing up in our house had been like living in a constant competition where I never quite understood the rules. Rebecca was 3 years older, and from the moment I could walk, it seemed like everything I did was measured against her achievements. When she won the spelling bee in 3rd grade, I was expected to do the same. When she was elected student body president in high school, my own smaller accomplishments felt insignificant by comparison. When she got into Harvard with a full scholarship, my acceptance to Arizona State felt like settling for scraps. Our parents never explicitly said they loved Rebecca more, but actions spoke louder than words. Her school plays were attended by the whole family, mine were missed due to work conflicts. Her graduation party had 100 guests and a catered dinner, mine was pizza in the backyard with immediate family. Her college acceptance letter was framed and hung in the living room, mine was mentioned briefly at dinner and then forgotten. I'd spent my teenage years trying to find my own path, something that would make me special in their eyes. I tried sports, but Rebecca had already claimed tennis and swimming. I tried music, but she had been first chair violin in the school orchestra. I tried academics, but even my best grades paled in comparison to her perfect report cards. By the time I graduated high school, I'd learned to stop trying to compete and started trying to just survive in her shadow. College had been my escape, or so I thought. While Rebecca was conquering Harvard Law, I was studying business and entrepreneurship at Arizona State. I had dreams of starting my own company, of building something from nothing, of proving that success could come in different forms. My parents tolerated my choice but made it clear they didn't understand it. Why take risks when you could follow a proven path like Rebecca? After graduation, while Rebecca was landing a prestigious position at Morrison, Fletcher & Associates, I was working various jobs, saving money, and developing a business plan. I spent 2 years as a marketing coordinator at a small firm, learning everything I could about digital marketing and social media strategy. I worked weekends at a coffee shop, not because I needed the money by then, but because I loved talking to small business owners about their dreams and challenges. 3 years ago, I'd finally taken the leap. I'd used my savings to start my own digital marketing consultancy, focusing on helping small businesses and nonprofits build their online presence. It wasn't glamorous work, and it certainly wasn't prestigious in the way my family valued prestige. I worked from my studio apartment, took meetings at coffee shops, and wore jeans more often than suits. To my family, it looked like I was struggling, like I hadn't quite figured out how to be a real adult. What they didn't know was that my little company had quietly grown into something significant. What had started as freelance social media management had evolved into a full-service digital marketing agency. I had a team of 12 contractors working with me, we managed campaigns for over 50 clients, and last year we'd generated over $2 million in revenue for our small business clients. But because I didn't have a corner office in a glass tower or wear designer suits to client meetings, my success remained invisible to my family. The irony wasn't lost on me that Rebecca worked for one of the most prestigious law firms in Phoenix, representing corporations in mergers and acquisitions, while I helped family-owned restaurants increase their customer base and assisted nonprofit organizations in reaching more people who needed their services. Her work made her wealthy and gave her status, while mine gave me purpose and, secretly, was making me wealthy too. But tonight wasn't about my hidden success, or my family's inability to see it. Tonight was Rebecca's night, and I was content to play my assigned role as the supportive little sister who hadn't quite found her way yet. I'd perfected this performance over the years, deflecting questions about my work with vague answers and self-deprecating humor. It was easier than trying to explain something they didn't want to understand. As dinner wound down, the band transitioned to dance music, and couples began moving toward the dance floor. I watched my parents dancing together, still graceful after 35 years of marriage. I saw Rebecca and David in the center of it all, lost in their perfect moment, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated their perfect love story. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, slid into the empty chair beside me. She was one of the few family members who had always been kind to me, asking genuine questions about my life and listening to the answers without judgment. "You look beautiful tonight, sweetheart," she said, patting my hand. "That color is perfect on you." "Thank you, Aunt Linda. You look pretty stunning yourself," she smiled, glancing around the elegant ballroom. "Rebecca certainly knows how to throw a party, though I have to say, all this fancy stuff makes me a little nervous. Remember when family celebrations meant barbecues in the backyard and games of horseshoes?" I laughed, remembering those simpler times. "Those were good days." "They were honest days," she said, and I caught something meaningful in her tone. People were just themselves, not trying to impress anyone or prove anything. Before I could ask what she meant, the music stopped, and Rebecca's maid of honor, her law school roommate Catherine, stepped up to the microphone. The room quieted as guests turned their attention to the front. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all having as wonderful a time as I am celebrating our beautiful bride and groom. Applause rippled through the room, and I clapped along, pushing down the familiar feeling of being an observer in my own family's story. Catherine launched into a well-rehearsed speech about Rebecca's ambition, her intelligence, her unwavering determination to succeed. She talked about late nights in the law library, about Rebecca's first day at Morrison, Fletcher and Associates, about the moment she knew David was the one because he was the only man who could match her drive and ambition. Rebecca has always been someone who sets her sights high and never settles for less than the best, Catherine continued. From the moment I met her, I knew she was destined for greatness. She's never been the type to take shortcuts or make excuses. She works harder than anyone I know, and she's earned every single thing she has. The words stung, though I knew they weren't intended as a direct attack on me. But in our family, praising Rebecca's work ethic had always been code for criticizing my different approach to life. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the old feeling of being found wanting. "And David," Catherine went on, "you found yourself a woman who will push you to be your best self, who will never let you settle for mediocrity. Together, you two are going to build an empire." More applause. More champagne glasses raised in tribute. I lifted mine dutifully, playing my part. But then Catherine's speech took an unexpected turn. I think what I admire most about Rebecca is that she's never let anyone else's limitations hold her back. She's always known that success requires sacrifice, that you can't achieve excellence by surrounding yourself with people who've given up on their dreams or settled for less than they're capable of. The words hung in the air, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Several pairs of eyes glanced in my direction, including my parents, who looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict the implication. "Rebecca once told me," Catherine continued, "that she learned early on that you are the company you keep. If you want to soar with eagles, you can't waste time with birds that are content to stay in the nest." My cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was a direct attack, delivered with a smile and applause, wrapped in the guise of celebrating my sister. I felt Aunt Linda's hand squeeze mine under the table, a small gesture of support that kept me from standing up and walking out. Catherine finally wrapped up her speech with more conventional wishes for happiness and prosperity, but the damage was done. As she handed the microphone to Rebecca for her response, I caught my sister's eye and saw something there that chilled me. Not embarrassment or apology for her friend's words, but satisfaction. This hadn't been an accident or an overstep by an enthusiastic maid of honor. This had been planned. Rebecca took the microphone with a gracious smile, thanking Catherine for her honest and heartfelt words. She thanked the guests for celebrating with them, thanked her parents for their love and support, thanked David's family for welcoming her with open arms. "David and I are so grateful to be surrounded by people who inspire us to be our best selves," she said, her voice carrying easily through the sound system. "We've both learned that success isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you create through hard work, determination, and making smart choices about how you spend your time and who you spend it with." Another pause, another glance in my direction. The message was crystal clear to anyone paying attention. "Unlike some people in this family," she continued, and the room went dead silent, "David and I actually made something of ourselves. We're not pathetic losers living in studio apartments, bouncing from one failed job to another." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. My parents looked mortified. Aunt Linda's grip on my hand tightened, and I could hear whispered conversations starting at tables around me. Rebecca's smile never wavered. "We believe in setting goals and achieving them, not making excuses for why dreams don't come true. We believe in taking responsibility for our lives instead of blaming circumstances or expecting other people to solve our problems." I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation and rage. This was my sister's wedding day, in front of 300 people including colleagues, friends, and extended family. She had chosen this moment, this platform, to publicly humiliate me in the most devastating way possible. "So here's to surrounding ourselves with winners," Rebecca concluded, raising her champagne glass. Here's to refusing to settle for mediocrity, and here's to always striving for excellence." The applause that followed was scattered and uncomfortable. Many guests looked confused or appalled by what they'd just witnessed. Others, particularly some of Rebecca's law firm colleagues, clapped enthusiastically as if they'd just heard an inspiring motivational speech rather than a public character assassination. I wanted to run. Every instinct told me to stand up, walk out of that ballroom, and never speak to any of them again. But something kept me in my seat. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the voice in my head that sounded remarkably like my grandmother, who used to tell me that difficult moments revealed character more than easy ones. As Rebecca handed the microphone back to the bandleader and the music resumed, I made a decision. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me flee. I wouldn't prove her point by running away from conflict. I would sit here with dignity, finish this horrible evening, and then decide what came next. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Just as couples began moving back to the dance floor and conversations resumed their normal volume, there was a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors had opened, and a man in an expensive charcoal suit was scanning the room. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair, and the kind of presence that commanded attention even in a room full of accomplished people. I recognized him immediately, though I was certain no one else at table 12 would. It was Harrison Mitchell, senior partner at Morrison, Fletcher and Associates. Rebecca's boss, though at her level she rarely interacted with the firm's senior partners directly. He was also, though nobody in this room knew it, one of my biggest clients. Mr. Harrison's eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom, and his entire demeanor changed. His face lit up with genuine pleasure, and he began making his way through the tables toward me, ignoring the curious looks from other guests who wondered why this clearly important man was heading away from the head table where the bride and groom sat. I stood up as he approached, my heart pounding with an entirely different kind of anxiety now. What was he doing here? How did he even know about Rebecca's wedding? And, more importantly, how was I going to handle this situation without completely destroying the careful separation I'd maintained between my professional life and my family? "Jazmin Rodriguez," he said as he reached my table, his voice warm with genuine affection. "I had no idea you'd be here. Tonight." Before I could respond, before I could even process what was happening, Harrison Mitchell did something that would be talked about in Phoenix social circles for years to come. In front of 300 wedding guests, including his own employee and her new husband, he bowed. Not a small nod of acknowledgement, but a deep, respectful bow that made it clear to everyone watching that he considered me someone deserving of his utmost respect. The ballroom, which had been buzzing with post-speech conversation, fell completely silent again. This time, the silence was different. It wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of social awkwardness, but the stunned hush that follows when everyone realizes they've been missing something important. "Mr. Harrison," I managed, finding my voice despite the surreal nature of the moment. "I didn't expect to see you here." He straightened, smiling warmly. "When I heard the Morrison name mentioned in connection with tonight's celebration, I had to come see if it was really you. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I wanted to personally thank you again for everything you've done for the firm." I was aware of movement in my peripheral vision, of people leaning forward to catch every word of this unexpected conversation. At the head table, I could see Rebecca staring at us with an expression of complete bewilderment. "It's been my pleasure working with Morrison, Fletcher and Associates," I replied carefully, still trying to figure out how to navigate this minefield. Mr. Harrison beamed. "Pleasure? Jazmin, you've revolutionized our entire approach to client outreach. The digital marketing strategy you developed for us has brought in over $15 million in new business in the past year alone. You've transformed how we think about connecting with potential clients." The words echoed through the silent ballroom, and I watched as understanding began to dawn on faces around the room. My parents looked confused, Aunt Linda looked delighted, and Rebecca looked like she was having an out-of-body experience. "I was just telling the other senior partners last week," Mr. Harrison continued, completely oblivious to the drama he was creating, that Rodriguez Digital is the best investment we've made in years. Your team's work has been absolutely exceptional. Rodriguez Digital, my company name, spoken aloud in front of my family for the first time. I saw my mother's eyes widen as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. "You're too kind, Mr. Harrison," I said, acutely aware that every word was being analyzed by 300 people. Kind? I'm being honest. Do you know she's been nominated for the Phoenix Business Journal's Entrepreneur of the Year award? He asked, addressing the question to my table but speaking loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. At 28 years old, she's built one of the most innovative marketing firms in the Southwest. We're not her only client either. I hear Rodriguez Digital works with everyone from tech startups to major nonprofits. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. This morning, I had been dreading this wedding, preparing myself for another evening of feeling invisible and inadequate. Now my sister's boss was publicly praising my work to a room full of people who had just heard me called a pathetic loser. The Phoenix Children's Hospital campaign your team managed last month? Mr. Harrison continued enthusiastically. Brilliant work. They exceeded their fundraising goal by 300%. And that small business initiative you spearheaded? It's helping dozens of local companies survive and thrive. You're not just running a business, Jazmin. You're making a real difference in this community. I glanced toward the head table and saw Rebecca in animated conversation with David, both of them looking in our direction with expressions I couldn't quite read. My parents had abandoned any pretense of not staring and were openly watching our conversation with fascination. I should let you get back to celebrating, I said, hoping to end this surreal encounter before it went any further. Of course, Mr. Harrison said. But before I go, I wanted to ask if you'd be available for lunch next week. The senior partners and I have a proposition for you. We'd like to discuss the possibility of Rodriguez Digital becoming our exclusive digital marketing partner. It would be a substantial contract, probably the largest your firm has handled. My mind reeled. An exclusive contract with Morrison, Fletcher & Associates would be a game-changer for my business. It would mean financial security, prestige, and the kind of growth I'd been working toward for years. I'd be very interested in hearing more, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Excellent. My assistant will call your office Monday to set something up. He paused, looking around the elegant ballroom with appreciation. Beautiful wedding, by the way. I believe the bride works for us? Rebecca Morrison? Rebecca Rodriguez, I corrected gently. She's my sister. The look of surprise that crossed his face was almost comical. Your sister? Well, isn't that something? She's a bright young associate. Very dedicated. Though I have to say, it seems like talent runs in the family, but in very different directions. He glanced toward the head table, where Rebecca was now standing, clearly debating whether to come over and insert herself into this conversation. Please give her my congratulations, he continued. And tell her I said she's lucky to have such an accomplished sister. I had no idea she was related to the Jazmin Rodriguez. What a small world. With that, he shook my hand warmly, nodded politely to the others at my table, and made his way back through the ballroom toward the exit. I watched him go, still trying to process what had just happened. The silence that followed his departure lasted only a few seconds before the whispers began. I could hear fragments of conversations at nearby tables as people tried to piece together what they'd just witnessed. Did he say $15 million? Rodriguez Digital? I've heard of them. They're supposed to be incredible. Entrepreneur of the Year? Isn't she the one Rebecca just called a loser? That was Harrison Mitchell. He doesn't talk to associates, let alone bow to random wedding guests. I sat back down, my legs suddenly unsteady, and looked around at my table companions. Aunt Linda was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. My cousin Mark looked impressed and confused in equal measure. The other guests at our table, people I barely knew, were staring at me with newfound interest. But it was the expression on my parents' faces that caught my attention. They looked stunned, yes, but also something else. Guilty, maybe? Ashamed? As if they were realizing that they'd been missing something important, that had been right in front of them. Before anyone could say anything, before I could even begin to process the emotional whiplash of the past 10 minutes, Rebecca appeared at our table. Her perfect wedding makeup couldn't quite hide the confusion and anger in her eyes. "Jazmin," she said, her voice tight with forced cheer. "What an interesting conversation that was. How exactly do you know Harrison Mitchell?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was my moment of choice. I could deflect, minimize, return to the comfortable dynamic, where Rebecca was the successful one and I was still figuring things out. I could protect her from the embarrassment of learning that her pathetic loser sister was actually more successful than she was. Or I could tell the truth. I looked at my sister, beautiful in her perfect dress at her perfect wedding, surrounded by her perfect life. I thought about all the years I'd spent making myself smaller to fit into the space she'd left for me. I thought about the speech she'd just given, the deliberate cruelty of calling me a pathetic loser in front of 300 people. And I made my choice. Rodriguez Digital has been handling Morrison, Fletcher & Associates digital marketing for the past year, I said clearly, my voice carrying to the nearby tables where people were still listening. Mr. Harrison is one of my clients. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Behind her I could see David approaching, looking like a man trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Your clients?" Rebecca repeated. "But you work in marketing coordination. You told us you do social media for small businesses." "I do work with small businesses," I confirmed. "I also work with major corporations, nonprofits, and apparently now I'm being considered for an exclusive contract with your law firm." The transformation on Rebecca's face was fascinating to watch. Confusion gave way to comprehension, which gave way to something that looked almost like panic. "You own Rodriguez Digital?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I founded it 3 years ago," I said simply. "We specialize in digital marketing strategy, social media management, and online brand development. We have 12 employees and over 50 active clients." "Employees?" This from my father, who had appeared beside Rebecca as if summoned by the drama. "Contractors, mostly," I clarified. "Though we're looking at hiring full-time staff next year as we expand." My mother materialized on Rebecca's other side, completing the family tableau. All 3 of them stared at me as if I'd just announced I was secretly a space alien. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, and for the first time I heard something other than disappointment in her voice when she spoke to me. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Because every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject, or assumed it wasn't important," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "When I mentioned getting new clients, you asked when I was going to get a real job. When I talked about business strategy, you suggested I consider going back to school for something more practical. After a while, it seemed easier to just not mention it. The truth hung between us, uncomfortable but undeniable. I watched my parents exchange glances, saw Rebecca processing the implications of what she'd just learned. "But your apartment," Rebecca said weakly. "You live in a studio." "I live in a studio because I like living simply," I replied. "Also because I've been putting most of my income back into growing the business. Though actually, I just bought a house. I'm moving next month." Another piece of information that landed like a revelation. My family's entire understanding of my life was being rewritten in real time. "A house?" my mother echoed. "A house," I confirmed. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, with a home office where I can meet with local clients. It's in the Arcadia area. Arcadia, one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Phoenix. I watched this information register on their faces. "Jazmin," Rebecca said, and for the first time in years I heard uncertainty in her voice. "I had no idea. I thought, we all thought." "You thought I was a failure," I finished gently. "I know. I let you think that because it was easier than constantly defending choices you didn't understand." The wedding reception continued around us, but our little family drama had created its own bubble of intense conversation. Other guests were trying to pretend they weren't listening while obviously hanging on every word. "The speech?" Rebecca said suddenly, her face going pale. Oh God, the speech. I called you a pathetic loser. In front of everyone. In front of your client. For the first time since this whole surreal evening began, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my sister. She was realizing that she had publicly humiliated someone who was not only more successful than she'd imagined, but who was also, in a strange way, her superior in the professional world they both inhabited. Mr. Harrison seemed to take it in stride, I said diplomatically. This is unbelievable, David interjected, speaking for the first time. Rebecca, you said Jazmin was struggling financially. You said she was wasting her life. I thought she was, Rebecca said weakly. She never talks about her work. She dresses casually. She lives in that tiny apartment. She doesn't seem to care about career advancement. Maybe because she doesn't need to care about traditional career advancement, Aunt Linda said dryly. Maybe because she's already advanced past the point where she needs to impress anyone. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Rebecca had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, earning recognition and respect through traditional markers of success. Meanwhile, I had built something from nothing, created my own path, and achieved a level of professional recognition that had escaped her notice entirely. I need to apologize, Rebecca said suddenly, to everyone, for what I said in my speech. That was completely inappropriate. Yes, it was, I agreed. But this is your wedding day, Rebecca. Let's not let this overshadow your celebration. I stood up, smoothing my simple navy dress. I think maybe it's time for me to head home. It's been quite an evening. No, my mother said quickly. Please don't leave. We need to talk about this. We need to understand. We can talk tomorrow, I said gently. Tonight is about Rebecca and David. Congratulations, both of you. I hope you'll be very happy together. I kissed Rebecca's cheek, squeezed my parents' hands, and hugged Aunt Linda goodbye. As I walked toward the exit, I could feel eyes following me, could hear the whispered conversations resuming as people processed what they'd just witnessed. At the coat check, I retrieved my purse and was about to call an Uber when I heard footsteps behind me. Jazmin, wait! I turned to find Rebecca hurrying after me, her elaborate dress making the pursuit awkward. I'm sorry, she said breathlessly. I'm so sorry. What I said was cruel and wrong, and I have no excuse for it. I studied my sister's face, seeing genuine remorse there, along with the shock and confusion. Why did you say it? I asked quietly. Even if you thought it was true, why would you humiliate me like that at your own wedding? Rebecca looked down at her hands, twisting her new wedding ring nervously. Because I was jealous, she said finally. I know that sounds crazy, given everything we just learned, but I was jealous of how content you seemed. How you never seemed to need anyone's approval or validation. I've spent my whole life working for recognition, for achievement, for other people's respect, and you just seemed so unbothered by any of it. The admission surprised me. In all our years of sibling rivalry and family dynamics, Rebecca had never expressed anything that sounded like envy toward me. I thought you were wasting your potential, she continued. I thought you'd given up on achieving anything meaningful. It frustrated me because I could see how smart you were, how capable, and it seemed like you just didn't care about success. I cared about success, I said. I just defined it differently than you did. Rebecca nodded, tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. I know that now. And I know there's no excuse for what I said tonight. I humiliated you in front of hundreds of people, including someone who clearly respects you professionally. I don't know how to make that right. I looked at my sister, beautiful and vulnerable in her wedding dress, finally seeing me as something other than her disappointing younger sibling. You can start by accepting that there are different ways to build a successful life, I said, and by recognizing that just because someone's path doesn't look like yours, doesn't mean they're lost. I will, she promised. And Jazmin, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm sorry I couldn't see it before. The words I'd been waiting to hear my entire life, finally spoken on the night I no longer needed them. There was irony in that, but also a strange kind of freedom. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than you know." We hugged then, carefully to avoid damaging her dress, and for a moment we were just sisters again. Not competitors or judge and defendant, just two women who had taken different paths and finally found a way to respect each other's choices. As I walked out into the warm Phoenix evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. The validation from Mr. Harrison had been gratifying, the shock on my family's faces had been satisfying, but it was Rebecca's apology and recognition that felt like the real gift. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "How's the wedding? Surviving the family drama?" I smiled as I typed back, "You're not going to believe what just happened. I'll tell you everything when I get home." As I waited for my Uber, I thought about the conversation I'd have with Mr. Harrison next week, about the exclusive contract that could transform my business, about the house I'd be moving into next month. I thought about my parents, who would need time to adjust their understanding of who I was and what I'd accomplished. I thought about Rebecca, who would have to live with the memory of calling her successful sister a pathetic loser in front of 300 people. But mostly, I thought about the lesson I'd learned tonight. That success doesn't always look the way people expect it to, that validation from others is nice but not necessary, and that sometimes the best revenge against those who underestimate you is simply living well and letting your work speak for itself. The Uber arrived, and as we drove through the Phoenix streets toward my studio apartment that I'd be leaving soon for a house in Arcadia, I smiled. Tomorrow I would start planning the next chapter of my life. Tonight I was content to savor the sweet taste of a victory I'd never seen coming. The following Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Phoenix feel almost magical. I sat in my studio apartment, which suddenly felt smaller than it had just a week ago, staring at my phone as it rang with call after call. Word of Saturday night's events had spread through Phoenix's business community faster than wildfire, and apparently everyone wanted to talk to the mysterious Jazmin Rodriguez, who had somehow managed to impress Harrison Mitchell enough to earn a public beau. My assistant, Maria, had been fielding calls since 7 in the morning. Tech startups wanted to discuss rebranding campaigns, established companies were inquiring about social media overhauls, and 3 different nonprofit organizations had reached out about potential partnerships. The Phoenix Business Journal had called twice, wanting to schedule an interview about my Entrepreneur of the Year nomination, something I'd managed to keep quiet until Mr. Harrison's enthusiastic announcement at the wedding. But it was the call from Morrison, Fletcher and Associates that I was both anticipating and dreading. Mr. Harrison's assistant had left a voicemail at 8 sharp, her crisp, professional tone conveying that this wasn't just a courtesy follow-up. The senior partners wanted to meet Thursday afternoon to discuss what she termed a significant expansion of our professional relationship. I poured myself another cup of coffee and settled at my kitchen table, which doubled as my desk when I wasn't meeting clients at coffee shops or in their offices. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to potentially sign the biggest contract of my career, while sitting in the same studio apartment that my family had seen as evidence of my failure. My laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Alex. His face appeared on the screen, hair still messy from sleep, wearing the old college t-shirt he favored for lazy mornings. "Good morning, Phoenix's newest business celebrity," he said with a grin that made my heart skip. "How are you handling your sudden fame?" "It's surreal," I admitted, tucking my legs under me. 3 days ago, my family thought I was a disappointment. Now my phone hasn't stopped ringing. Alex worked as a software engineer for a gaming company in Austin, which was how we'd met at a tech conference 2 years ago. Our long-distance relationship had been challenging, but he'd been my anchor through all the family drama and professional struggles. He understood the entrepreneurial life in a way my family never had. "Any word from Rebecca since Saturday night?" he asked, settling back in what I recognized as his kitchen. "Radio silence," I said, though my mom called yesterday. That was interesting. Interesting how? I stood up, carrying my laptop to the window where the morning light was better. She wanted to know why I never told them about Rodriguez Digital. When I explained that I'd tried to talk about my work but they always seemed uninterested, she got very quiet. Then she asked if she could take me to lunch this week to catch up properly. Alex raised an eyebrow. "Catch up properly? That's code for we need to completely reassess our understanding of our daughter, isn't it?" "Probably." She also mentioned that Dad has been asking questions about digital marketing for his dental practice. Apparently, he's been thinking about updating their online presence but didn't know where to start. And now he discovers his daughter is exactly the person he needs to talk to. The timing is almost funny, I said. If it weren't so frustrating. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see it was from Rebecca. My stomach tightened as I read it. Rebecca just texted, I told Alex. She wants to know if we can talk this week. Says she has something important to discuss. Are you going to respond? I considered the question. Part of me wanted to let her stew in her embarrassment for a while longer. The memory of her calling me a pathetic loser in front of 300 people was still fresh, still stinging. But another part of me, the part that remembered us as kids building blanket forts and sharing secrets, wanted to hear what she had to say. I'll probably call her later, I decided, but first I need to figure out what I'm going to say to Morrison, Fletcher, and Associates on Thursday. What's to figure out? They want to give you a massive contract. You say yes, and then we celebrate by planning my move to Phoenix. The casual way he mentioned moving made my heart leap. We'd been talking about closing the distance between us for months, but his job in Austin was good and my business was just hitting its stride. The timing never seemed right. Are you serious about moving? I asked. I've been serious for months. I just didn't want to pressure you while you were building Rodriguez Digital. But now that you're about to land the biggest contract in Phoenix legal history, it seems like the perfect time. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Morrison, Fletcher, and Associates, and my pulse quickened. I have to take this, I told Alex. It's the law firm. Good luck. Call me later with details. I ended the video call and answered the phone on the fourth ring. Jazmin Rodriguez speaking. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Patricia Wells, Mr. Harrison's executive assistant. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all. How can I help you? Mr. Harrison would like to move your meeting to tomorrow instead of Thursday, if that's possible. He's had to rearrange his schedule due to some urgent client matters. Tomorrow, Tuesday. Less than 24 hours to prepare for what could be the most important business meeting of my life. Tomorrow works fine, I said, probably sounding more confident than I felt. What time? 2 o'clock. In the executive conference room on the 42nd floor. The other senior partners will be joining you, so please plan for the meeting to last at least 2 hours. 2 hours with the senior partners of one of Phoenix's most prestigious law firms. I'd worked with Morrison, Fletcher, and Associates for a year, but always through intermediaries and project managers. This would be my first time presenting directly to the decision makers. I'll be there, I confirmed. Should I prepare any specific materials? Mr. Harrison mentioned you should bring whatever you think best demonstrates Rodriguez Digital's capabilities and vision. He's quite eager to discuss the future of your partnership. After we hung up, I sat in the morning quiet of my apartment, letting the magnitude of the situation sink in. In less than 24 hours, I would be sitting across from the most powerful lawyers in Phoenix, discussing a contract that could transform my business from a successful small agency into a major player in the digital marketing world. I spent the rest of Monday preparing. I updated my presentation materials, printed portfolio pieces showcasing our best work, and rehearsed my pitch until I could deliver it in my sleep. By evening, I felt as ready as I could be, but sleep was elusive. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mind racing with possibilities and scenarios. Tuesday morning dawned gray and cloudy, unusual for Phoenix in October. I chose my outfit carefully. A charcoal gray suit that was professional without being stuffy, paired with a silk blouse in deep blue that brought out my eyes. I looked in the mirror and saw someone who belonged in an executive conference room, someone who had earned her place at the table. The Morrison, Fletcher, and Associates building dominated an entire block of downtown Phoenix, its glass facade reflecting the desert mountains in the distance. I'd been here before for smaller meetings, but never to the 42nd floor. Never to the executive level where the senior partners had their offices. The elevator ride seemed to take forever. I watched the numbers climb, each floor representing another step away from the ground-level world where I'd started Rodriguez Digital in my studio apartment. When the doors finally opened on 42, I stepped into a world of polished marble, original artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the Valley of the Sun, Patricia Wells greeted me at the reception desk, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested she ran this floor with military precision. Ms. Rodriguez, welcome. Mr. Harrison is looking forward to seeing you again under more conventional circumstances this time. She led me down a hallway lined with portraits of the firm's founding partners, men in dark suits from another era who had built this legal empire from the ground up. The executive conference room was exactly what I'd expected. A massive mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, windows offering panoramic views of the city, and technology that probably cost more than most people's cars. Mr. Harrison was already there, along with 3 other senior partners I recognized from the firm's website. They stood as I entered, a courtesy that still surprised me, even after a year of professional success. Jazmin, thank you for adjusting your schedule, Mr. Harrison said, shaking my hand warmly. I believe you know Margaret Chen, our managing partner, and Robert Martinez, who heads our corporate division. And this is James Patterson, our senior partner emeritus. I shook hands with each of them, noting the genuine interest in their expressions. These weren't people going through the motions of a courtesy meeting. They were here because they saw opportunity. Please, have a seat, Margaret Chen said, gesturing to the chair at the head of the table. We've all reviewed the work Rodriguez Digital has done for us over the past year, and we're impressed. Very impressed. Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with Morrison, Fletcher, and Associates. The pleasure has been ours, Robert Martinez interjected. The digital marketing campaign you developed for our corporate clients has exceeded every expectation. We've seen a 40% increase in qualified leads since implementing your strategies. James Patterson leaned forward, his gray eyes sharp despite his retirement status. In my 50 years practicing law, I've learned to recognize exceptional talent when I see it. What you've built with Rodriguez Digital represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach our industry needs. Mr. Harrison opened a leather portfolio in front of him. Which brings us to why we asked you here today. We have a proposition that we believe could benefit both Rodriguez Digital and Morrison, Fletcher and Associates significantly. My heart rate increased, but I kept my expression neutral and professional. We'd like to offer Rodriguez Digital an exclusive partnership agreement, Margaret Chen said. Morrison, Fletcher and Associates would become your primary client with a guaranteed annual contract worth $2.5 million. The number hit me like a physical force. $2.5 million. Annual. It was more than Rodriguez Digital had generated in total revenue since I'd started the company. That's a significant commitment, I managed to say. It would be, Mr. Harrison agreed. In exchange, we'd expect Rodriguez Digital to prioritize our needs, expand your team to handle our increased volume, and work exclusively with Morrison, Fletcher and Associates in the legal sector. Robert Martinez slid a thick document across the table. The preliminary contract outlines the details, but essentially we're proposing a 5-year partnership. Rodriguez Digital would handle all of our digital marketing, social media management, content creation, and online brand development. We'd also want you to consult on our client acquisition strategies and help us develop digital tools for client communication. I picked up the contract, its weight feeling symbolic. This was what I'd been working toward for 3 years, the kind of opportunity that could establish Rodriguez Digital as a major force in the Phoenix business community. There's one more component to our offer, James Patterson said. We'd like Rodriguez Digital to move into our building. We have office space on the 28th floor that we could customize to meet your needs. You'd have room for a team of 20, full access to our technology infrastructure, and the prestige of a Morrison, Fletcher and Associates address. 28th floor. Office space in the most prestigious business building in Phoenix. A team of 20. The scope of what they were proposing was almost overwhelming. This is an incredible opportunity, I said carefully. Can I ask what prompted this level of investment in Rodriguez Digital? Margaret Chen smiled. Honestly, it started with Harrison's report about your work, but it crystallized at your sister's wedding. I felt a flicker of confusion. The wedding? Harrison came back from that event more convinced than ever. That we needed to secure our relationship with you, she explained. He said he watched you handle an extremely difficult personal situation with grace and professionalism, even when you were being publicly criticized. Mr. Harrison nodded. The way you conducted yourself that night, maintaining your dignity while clearly holding all the cards, told us everything we needed to know about your character. In our business, character matters as much as competence. The irony was almost too much to process. Rebecca's attempt to humiliate me had actually served as a professional reference, demonstrating qualities that made me more attractive as a business partner. We also did some additional research after Saturday night, Robert Martinez added. We discovered that Rodriguez Digital's client retention rate is 97%. Your team's work has helped clients generate over $50 million in additional revenue, and you've been nominated for multiple business awards. All achievements that somehow never came up in casual conversation with your family, James Patterson observed with a slight smile. Which suggests a level of humility that's rare in our experience. I looked around the table at these four accomplished professionals, realizing that they saw value in me that my own family had missed for years. The validation was intoxicating, but I forced myself to focus on the business implications. The exclusive partnership in the legal sector, I said. That would mean turning down other law firms as clients. Correct, Margaret Chen confirmed. But Morrison, Fletcher & Associates represents 40% of the major corporate legal work in Arizona. You'd have more opportunities with us than you could pursue independently. What about my existing clients in other sectors? We'd expect you to honor those commitments, Mr. Harrison said. We have no interest in limiting Rodriguez Digital's growth in other areas. In fact, we think a diverse client base would make you even more valuable to us. I flipped through the contract, noting the terms and conditions. It was more generous than I'd dared hope, with built-in growth incentives and performance bonuses that could push the annual value even higher. There is one consideration we should discuss, Robert Martinez said. This partnership would put Rodriguez Digital in a very visible position in Phoenix's business community. You'd be representing not just your own company, but Morrison, Fletcher & Associates. That comes with certain expectations about professionalism and public presence. What kind of expectations? Speaking engagements, industry events, possibly board positions with local business organizations, Margaret Chen explained. You'd become a public face for both companies. Some people find that level of visibility challenging. I thought about the years I'd spent avoiding attention, deflecting praise, minimizing my achievements to avoid family conflict. The idea of being a public figure was daunting, but also oddly appealing. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. I think I could adapt to that, I said. James Patterson chuckled. I suspect you'll do more than adapt. You'll probably excel at it. We spent the next hour going through the contract details, discussing timelines and logistics. The partnership would begin January 1st, giving me 2 months to expand my team and transition to the new office space. Rodriguez Digital would start with a staff of 15, with plans to grow to 20 within the first year. As the meeting wound down, Mr. Harrison walked me to the elevator. Jazmin, I want you to know that this isn't just about business for us. We believe Rodriguez Digital represents the future of professional services marketing. You found a way to combine traditional relationship building with cutting-edge technology. That's exactly what our industry needs. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That means a great deal coming from you. I hope you'll seriously consider our offer. I think this partnership could be transformative for both of our organizations. As the elevator descended from the 42nd floor, I stared at my reflection in the polished metal doors. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Confident, successful, on the verge of signing a contract that would change everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. How did it go? Dying to hear details. I smiled, typing back. Better than I could have imagined, calling you from the car. But first, I had another call to make. I dialed Rebecca's number as I walked to the parking garage, my heels echoing off the concrete walls. Jazmin? She answered on the second ring, surprise evident in her voice. Hi, Rebecca. You said you wanted to talk this week. Are you free for dinner tonight? There was a pause. Yes, of course. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. Actually, everything's better than fine. But I think it's time we had a real conversation about where we go from here. I'd like that. Where do you want to meet? I thought for a moment, then smiled. How about that new place in Scottsdale? The one that got the great review in Phoenix magazine. Vincent on Camelback? That's pretty expensive, Jazmin. Don't worry about it, I said, settling into my car. Dinner's on me. As I drove home through the Phoenix afternoon traffic, I thought about the conversation I'd have with Rebecca tonight. For the first time in our lives, I would be speaking to her from a position of strength, not as the little sister seeking approval, but as a successful businesswoman who had built something remarkable. The exclusive partnership with Morrison, Fletcher & Associates would change everything, not just professionally, but personally. It would be impossible for my family to continue seeing me as the daughter who hadn't quite figured things out. The question was whether Rebecca could adjust to a new dynamic where I was no longer in her shadow. I pulled into my apartment complex, looking up at the modest building where I'd spent the last 3 years building Rodriguez Digital from nothing. In 2 months, I'd be moving into the Morrison, Fletcher & Associates building, into office space that would announce to the world that I had arrived. But tonight, I had a more personal challenge ahead of me. Tonight I would sit across from my sister and find out whether our relationship could survive the revelation that the pathetic loser she'd mocked at her wedding was actually more successful than she was. The thought should have made me nervous, but instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to family interactions: excitement. For the first time, I was looking forward to a conversation with Rebecca, because for the first time, we would be talking as equals. I spent the afternoon preparing for our dinner, choosing my outfit carefully, and rehearsing what I wanted to say. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about finally being honest about who I was and what I'd accomplished, and seeing whether Rebecca could accept the sister she'd never really known. As the sun set over the Phoenix Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with business contracts or professional success. Tonight, I would find out whether my family could make room for the real Jazmin Rodriguez, the one who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. The woman who had built an empire from her kitchen table, who had earned the respect of Phoenix's most powerful business leaders, and who was no longer willing to pretend to be anything less than extraordinary. Vincent on Camelback occupied the top floor of a sleek glass building in the heart of Scottsdale's entertainment district, offering panoramic views of the valley and a menu that had earned rave reviews from every food critic in Arizona. I arrived 15 minutes early, wanting to secure a table with enough privacy for the conversation Rebecca and I needed to have. The hostess, a polished young woman who probably earned more in tips than most people made in salary, led me to a corner booth with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I ordered a glass of wine and settled in to wait, using the time to collect my thoughts. The afternoon meeting with Morrison, Fletcher & Associates still felt surreal. The contract offer sat in my purse, a tangible reminder that my life was about to change in ways I was still processing. $2.5 million annually. Office space in the most prestigious building in Phoenix. A team of 20 employees. The numbers seemed almost fictional, disconnected from the woman who had spent 3 years building a business from her kitchen table. Rebecca arrived exactly on time, because of course she did. She moved through the restaurant with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to fine dining, her designer handbag and perfectly coordinated outfit marking her as someone who belonged in places like this. She'd changed since the wedding, trading her role as radiant bride for that of successful attorney. But the transformation went deeper than clothing. There was uncertainty in her eyes that I'd never seen before, a crack in the armor of absolute self-assurance she'd worn since childhood. "Jazmin," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Thank you for suggesting this place. I've been wanting to try it." "The reviews have been incredible," I replied, signaling the server. I thought it was time we talked somewhere neutral, somewhere we could focus on being honest with each other. Rebecca ordered a martini, her fingers drumming nervously against the table as we waited for it to arrive. The silence between us felt different than it had in years, charged with unspoken questions, and revelations that had upended everything we thought we knew about each other. "David sends his regards," she said finally, clearly searching for safe conversation. "He's been asking questions about your business since Saturday night. I think he's impressed." "What kind of questions?" "Professional ones, mostly. He wanted to know how long you've been running Rodriguez Digital, what kind of clients you work with, how you built such a successful company without anyone knowing about it." The server returned with Rebecca's martini and refilled my wine glass. Rebecca took a careful sip, gathering courage for whatever she'd come here to say. "I need to apologize again for Saturday night," she said, her voice lower than usual. "What I said was unforgivable. I humiliated you in front of hundreds of people, including your client. I don't understand how you managed to stay so composed." "Years of practice," I said simply. "I've been managing family situations where I felt misunderstood for most of my life." Rebecca flinched at the observation, recognizing the truth in it. "I never realized how much we'd been discounting your achievements. Mom and Dad are beside themselves. They keep asking how they missed something so significant." "They missed it because they weren't looking for it," I said, surprising myself with how matter-of-fact I sounded. "When someone consistently treats your choices as mistakes, you stop sharing those choices with them." "But 3 years, Jazmin. 3 years you've been building this company, earning recognition, working with major clients. How did we miss all of that?" I considered the question, remembering all the times I'd tried to share good news only to have it minimized or dismissed. "Do you remember when I told you I'd landed a big client about 18 months ago? You said it was nice that I was staying busy with my little projects?" Rebecca's face colored with embarrassment. "I remember that conversation differently." "I'm sure you do." "Or when I mentioned I was working with a law firm, and Dad suggested I should consider applying for paralegal positions, since I was already in that environment." "Oh, God," Rebecca whispered. "We really did that, didn't we? We turned everything you said into evidence that you weren't achieving enough. It became easier to just not mention work at all," I explained. "When someone asks how business is going and you say it's growing, but they respond by asking when you're going to get a real job, you learn to keep your successes to yourself." The server appeared to take our dinner orders, providing a brief reprieve from the intensity of the conversation. Rebecca ordered the salmon, I chose the lamb, and we both requested the wine pairing, as if alcohol might make this excavation of family dynamics more manageable. "I keep thinking about Saturday night," Rebecca said after the server left, "about Harrison Mitchell bowing to you in front of everyone. The look on his face when he talked about your work. He spoke about you the way people speak about industry legends." "Mr. Harrison has been very supportive," I said diplomatically. "Supportive enough to offer you an exclusive contract, apparently." David heard rumors at the office that Morrison, Fletcher & Associates is courting Rodriguez Digital for a major partnership. I sipped my wine, considering how much to reveal. The contract offer was still confidential, but Rebecca would find out soon enough through David's connections to the legal community. "They've made an offer," I confirmed, "a significant one." "How significant?" "Significant enough that I'll need to hire 15 new employees and move into office space in their building." Rebecca's eyes widened. 15 employees? "Jazmin, how big is Rodriguez Digital?" "Right now? 12 contractors and 2 full-time staff. But if I accept Morrison's offer, we'll be scaling up considerably." "Contractors," Rebecca repeated slowly. "You have employees. You're not just a freelancer with a fancy business name." "I haven't been a freelancer for over 2 years," I said. "Rodriguez Digital is a full-service agency. We have clients in tech, healthcare, non-profit, retail, and obviously legal services. We manage social media accounts with millions of followers, develop marketing strategies for companies with $100 million budgets, and consult on digital transformation projects for established businesses." Each revelation seemed to hit Rebecca like a physical blow. I could see her mentally recalculating everything she thought she knew about my life, my work, my success. "The Entrepreneur of the Year nomination," she said. "That's real too, isn't it?" "The Phoenix Business Journal announced the nominees last month. The winner will be announced at their annual awards dinner in December." And you didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? You and David were busy with wedding planning. Mom and Dad were focused on the preparations. When I mentioned I'd been nominated for a business award, Mom said that was nice and then immediately started talking about the floral arrangements for your reception. Rebecca buried her face in her hands. We're horrible people. We're absolutely horrible people. You're not horrible, I said gently. You're just people who got comfortable with a particular narrative about your family dynamics. It happens. No, it doesn't just happen. We made assumptions and never bothered to verify them. We decided you were struggling, and then interpreted everything you said through that lens. Our appetizers arrived, giving us both a moment to compose ourselves. Rebecca ordered another martini, clearly needing the liquid courage to continue this conversation. There's something else I need to tell you, she said once the server had left. Something that happened at work today. I waited, sensing that whatever came next would be significant. Harrison Mitchell called me into his office this afternoon, she continued. He wanted to discuss the events at my wedding. My stomach tightened. I'd been hoping the professional and personal aspects of Saturday night could remain separate, but apparently that had been naive. What did he say? He wanted to know why I'd publicly criticized you when Rodriguez Digital is one of the firm's most valued partners. He said my behavior reflected poorly on my judgment and professionalism. The implications of that conversation were staggering. Rebecca's boss had essentially reprimanded her for attacking me, not knowing we were sisters until after the fact. He didn't know we were related until Saturday night, I said. Exactly. Which made it even worse from his perspective. He thought I'd randomly decided to attack a respected business leader at my own wedding. When he found out you were my sister, he said it raised serious questions about my character and decision-making. Rebecca's voice was tight with stress. Jazmin, I think I might have damaged my career. Harrison suggested I take some time to reflect on whether I'm suited for client-facing work. He's moving me to research and document review for the foreseeable future. The revelation hit me with unexpected force. I'd wanted Rebecca to face consequences for her behavior, but I hadn't anticipated that those consequences would jeopardize her professional standing. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. I never intended for this to affect your job. It's not your fault, it's mine. I chose to humiliate you publicly, and now I'm facing the professional consequences of that choice. She took a long sip of her martini. David is furious with me. Not just about Saturday night, but about how I've treated you for years. He said he's been uncomfortable with my attitude toward you, but didn't know how to address it. David's always been kind to me. Because David sees people clearly, he never bought into the narrative that you were failing at life. He kept asking me why I was so critical of your choices, why I seemed threatened by your independence. Threatened? Rebecca looked out the window at the city lights, avoiding my eyes. He said I acted like someone who was jealous of your freedom, your willingness to take risks, your ability to build something meaningful without needing anyone's approval. The observation was perceptive and uncomfortable. I had never considered that Rebecca might envy aspects of my life, especially given her obvious professional and financial success. David was right, she continued. I was jealous. I've spent my entire adult life following a prescribed path, checking boxes, meeting expectations. Law school, prestigious firm, appropriate marriage, proper neighborhood. Every choice I've made has been about external validation. She turned back to me, tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. And then there's you, building a business from nothing, choosing passion over security, creating something uniquely yours. Part of me always wondered what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to take risks like you did. The admission was so unexpected, so contrary to everything I'd believed about our dynamic that I needed a moment to process it. I thought you looked down on my choices because they weren't conventional enough, I said. I looked down on them because they were braver than anything I'd ever done. It was easier to convince myself you were making mistakes than to admit you were doing something I was too scared to attempt. Our entrees arrived, providing another natural pause in a conversation that was rewriting years of assumed understanding. We ate in relative silence, both processing revelations that required fundamental shifts in perspective. There's something else, Rebecca said as we finished our main courses. Something about Mom and Dad that you should know. I set down my fork, bracing myself for another bombshell. They've been talking since Saturday night about ways to support your business. Dad wants to hire Rodriguez Digital to revamp the marketing for his dental practice. Mom has been researching digital marketing services, trying to understand what you actually do for work. Better late than never, I suppose. They feel terrible, Jazmin. Genuinely terrible. Dad keeps saying he can't believe he never asked about your client base or revenue. Mom has been crying about all the times she suggested you consider going back to school for something more practical. I sipped my wine, considering this information. Part of me appreciated their belated recognition, but another part resented that it had taken public validation from strangers to make them see value in my work. They want to throw you a party, Rebecca continued, to celebrate the Entrepreneur of the Year nomination, to acknowledge Rodriguez Digital's success, to make up for years of not recognizing your achievements. A party? A big one. They're talking about renting a venue, inviting extended family and friends, making it a proper celebration of your success. The idea of my parents throwing me a party felt surreal. Throughout my childhood and early adulthood, celebrations had been reserved for Rebecca's achievements. My accomplishments, when they were acknowledged at all, warranted dinner out or a congratulatory phone call. How do you feel about that? I asked. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, part of me is still processing the fact that my little sister is more successful than I am. It's an adjustment. Success isn't a competition, Rebecca. I know that intellectually, but emotionally I've spent my entire life being the achiever in our family. Having that identity challenged is harder than I expected. She signaled the server for another drink, clearly planning to make this a long evening. David pointed out something interesting last night. He said that my definition of success has always been about other people's approval. Prestigious job, expensive things, social recognition. Your definition seems to be about impact and independence. I just wanted to build something that mattered, I said. Something that would help other people succeed. And you did. You built something remarkable while I was busy climbing a ladder that someone else had positioned for me. The server brought dessert menus, but neither of us seemed interested in food anymore. This conversation was consuming all of our emotional energy. What happens now? Rebecca asked. With us, I mean. How do we move forward from here? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself since Saturday night. Our relationship had been built on a foundation of assumptions that were now revealed to be false. Rebecca wasn't the effortlessly superior older sister, and I wasn't the struggling younger daughter. We were both successful women who had taken different paths and achieved different types of recognition. I think we start by being honest, I said, about who we are, what we've accomplished, and what we want from each other going forward. I want to be proud of you without feeling threatened, Rebecca said quietly. I want to celebrate your success without comparing it to my own. I want to be the sister you deserve, not the one I've been. That would be nice, I admitted. I'd like to have conversations about work where you don't suggest I consider more stable career options. I'd like to share good news without having it minimized or redirected to your achievements. I promise to do better. I know that probably sounds hollow after years of dismissive behavior, but I mean it. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle below us. The conversation had been emotionally exhausting but necessary, clearing the air of years of accumulated resentment and misunderstanding. The Morrison contract, Rebecca said eventually. Are you going to accept it? I think so. It's an incredible opportunity, and it would establish Rodriguez Digital as a major player in the Phoenix business community. It would also make you one of the most influential business leaders in the city. You realize that, right? Harrison Mitchell doesn't offer exclusive partnerships to small agencies. He's positioning you as an equal, as someone whose success reflects well on Morrison, Fletcher & Associates. I hadn't fully considered the broader implications of the partnership beyond the immediate business benefits. Rebecca was right. This contract would elevate my profile considerably. The Phoenix Business Journal wants to do a feature article about the partnership when it's announced, I said. Apparently, it's unusual for a firm like Morrison to partner so extensively with the boutique agency. Because it's not really a boutique agency anymore, is it? You're running a substantial business with impressive clients and significant revenue. You've just been flying under the radar. I preferred the anonymity. It allowed me to focus on the work instead of the recognition. But recognition has its benefits too, Rebecca pointed out. It opens doors, creates opportunities, establishes credibility. Maybe it's time to step into the spotlight. As we waited for the check, I reflected on how much had changed in just 4 days. On Saturday, I'd been the family disappointment, hiding my success to avoid conflict. Tonight, I was sitting across from my sister discussing business strategy and career advancement as equals. There's one more thing I need to ask you, Rebecca said as we prepared to leave. Would you be willing to have dinner with Mom and Dad this weekend? They're desperate to talk to you, to apologize properly and understand what they missed. I considered the request. Part of me wanted to make them wait, to let them sit with their guilt for a while longer. But another part recognized that healing our family relationships would require forgiveness and fresh starts. I'll think about it, I said finally. But if we do this, it has to be a real conversation, not just them apologizing and then expecting everything to go back to normal. I think they understand that things can't go back to normal. Too much has changed. We split the check, though I'd intended to pay for the entire meal. Rebecca insisted, saying it was a small gesture toward rebalancing our relationship. As we walked to the parking garage, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Jazmin, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Are you happy with your life, your choices, everything you've built? The question caught me off guard with its sincerity. Yes, I said after a moment. I am. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living authentically, building something meaningful, making choices based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. I envy that, Rebecca said quietly. I hope someday I can say the same thing. We hugged goodbye in the parking garage, a gesture that felt different than the perfunctory embraces we'd exchanged at family gatherings for years. This felt like the beginning of something new, a relationship built on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. As I drove home through the Phoenix night, I thought about the conversation we'd just had and the one I'd likely have with my parents this weekend. The professional success felt good, but the possibility of genuine family relationships felt even better. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. How did dinner go? Ready to hear all the details. I smiled, typing back, better than expected. Calling you when I get home. Rodriguez Digital's future was bright, the Morrison partnership would change everything, and for the first time in years my family seemed ready to see me as I actually was, rather than as they'd assumed I should be. The woman who had hidden her success to keep peace was gone, replaced by someone willing to claim her achievements and demand recognition for her work. Tomorrow I would sign the contract that would transform Rodriguez Digital from a successful small business into a major force in Phoenix's business community. But tonight, I was content to savor the knowledge that I was finally living without apology, building the life I'd always wanted, and surrounded by people who were beginning to see my worth. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of crystal-clear sky that made Phoenix feel like paradise. I stood in my studio apartment, surrounded by boxes and packing materials, preparing for a move that would happen in just 6 weeks. The Morrison contract sat signed on my kitchen counter, its execution having transformed Rodriguez Digital overnight from a successful small business into a major player in Arizona's professional services sector. The Phoenix Business Journal had called twice that morning, wanting to schedule interviews about the partnership announcement that would run Monday. But today wasn't about business. Today was about family. About the dinner my parents had requested and the conversation that would either heal years of misunderstanding or confirm that some damage couldn't be repaired. I'd agreed to meet them at their house at 6, the same dining room where I'd spent countless meals feeling invisible and inadequate. The difference was that this time, I wasn't the struggling daughter hoping for approval. I was Jazmin Rodriguez, CEO of Rodriguez Digital, exclusive partner to Morrison, Fletcher & Associates, and nominee for Entrepreneur of the Year. The woman walking into that house tonight would be claiming her space rather than apologizing for occupying it. My phone rang as I folded clothes into moving boxes. Alex's face appeared on the screen, his familiar smile providing the calm reassurance I'd come to depend on over the past 2 years. "Moving day prep?" he asked, noting the boxes visible behind me. "Partly. Also getting ready for dinner with my parents tonight. The big family reconciliation dinner." "Are you nervous?" I considered the question. More like cautious. I want to believe they're genuinely ready to see me differently, but I've been disappointed before. What's the worst that could happen? They could apologize politely and then spend the rest of the evening trying to give me advice about managing my business, or suggesting I need to be more conservative with my growth plans. Alex laughed. "And if they do that? Then I'll know where we stand, and I can adjust my expectations accordingly." "You're different, you know," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "Since the wedding, since the Morrison contract. You're carrying yourself differently." "How so?" "More confident. Like you've finally decided to stop apologizing for being successful." The observation was accurate. Somewhere between Harrison Mitchell's bow at the wedding and signing the biggest contract of my career, I'd shed the last vestiges of the woman who minimized her achievements to avoid family conflict. "I think I'm done pretending to be smaller than I am," I said. "Good. Because I have news that might require you to think even bigger." I paused in my packing, giving him my full attention. "What kind of news?" "I gave my notice in Austin yesterday. 2 weeks from now, I'll be a free agent looking for opportunities in Phoenix." My heart skipped. "Alex, are you serious?" "I've been planning this for months. The timing just worked out perfectly with your Morrison contract. I figured Phoenix's newest business mogul might need someone around to help her celebrate her success." "Business mogul?" I laughed. "I think you're getting ahead of yourself." "Am I?" "Because I've been doing some research on Morrison, Fletcher & Associates. They don't offer exclusive partnerships to small agencies. They offer them to companies they consider strategic assets, businesses they want to grow alongside for the long term." He was right, of course. The Morrison partnership wasn't just about my current capabilities. It was about their projection of where Rodriguez Digital could be in 5 years. "I'm scared," I admitted. "This is all happening so fast." A year ago, I was working from my kitchen table, hoping to book enough clients to pay rent. Now I'm about to manage a team of 20 people and represent one of the most prestigious firms in Arizona. "You're ready for this," Alex said with certainty. "You've been ready for years. You just needed other people to catch up to what you already knew about yourself." After we hung up, I finished packing the box I'd been working on and took a shower, washing away the dust and stress of preparation. As I got dressed for dinner, I chose my outfit carefully. Not the professional attire I'd worn to meet with Morrison, but not the casual clothes I'd typically worn to family gatherings. I settled on dark jeans and a silk blouse, clothes that suggested success without flaunting it. The drive to my parents' house took me through neighborhoods I'd known since childhood, past the elementary school where I'd first learned I was different from Rebecca, past the high school where I'd stopped trying to compete with her achievements. The familiar streets felt different now, like I was seeing them through new eyes. My parents' house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Scottsdale, a sprawling ranch-style home they'd bought when Rebecca started high school. The same house where I'd spent my teenage years feeling like a guest in my own family, where conversations about my future had always carried undertones of disappointment. I parked in the driveway behind my father's BMW, taking a moment to compose myself before walking to the front door. The evening air was perfect, warm but not hot, with the kind of gentle breeze that made desert living feel like a privilege. My mother answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for my arrival. She looked nervous, her usually perfect appearance showing signs of stress. Her hair was styled but not as meticulously as usual, and she was wearing a simple dress instead of the coordinated outfits she typically chose for family gatherings. "Jazmin, thank you for coming," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "I know this has been a difficult week for all of us." "Hi, Mom. Where's Dad?" "In the kitchen, fussing with dinner. He insisted on cooking tonight instead of ordering from that place we usually get." I followed her into the house, noting changes I hadn't noticed before. The wall of family photos still dominated the entryway, but someone had added new frames. Pictures of me at my college graduation, at the ribbon cutting for a client's new location, at a networking event where I'd been a featured speaker. Images that had been buried in photo albums were now displayed prominently alongside Rebecca's achievements. "When did you put these up?" I asked, pausing in front of a photo of me accepting an award from the Phoenix Chamber of Commerce. "Yesterday," my mother said quietly. "Your father spent hours going through old photos, looking for pictures of you that we should have been displaying all along." The gesture was touching, but also highlighted how invisible I'd been in my own family's narrative. These photos had existed for years, but they'd been tucked away while Rebecca's accomplishments dominated the visual story of our family. We entered the kitchen, where my father was stirring something at the stove with the concentrated attention of someone who rarely cooked. He looked up as we entered, his face lighting up in a way that surprised me. "Jazmin, there's my entrepreneur daughter," he said, setting down the spoon and approaching me for a hug. "I've been looking forward to this conversation all week." "Dad, you didn't have to cook. We could have ordered something." "I wanted to cook for you," he said. "It's been too long since we've had a proper family dinner focused on celebrating your achievements." The words were so contrary to my usual family experience that I needed a moment to process them. My father, who had spent years suggesting I needed more practical career goals, was talking about celebrating my achievements. "How can I help?" I asked, falling into the familiar rhythm of family meal preparation. "Just sit and let us take care of you for once," my mother said, guiding me to a chair at the kitchen island. "We want to hear everything about your business, about the Morrison partnership, about what we've been missing." I settled onto the bar stool, accepting the glass of wine my father offered. The kitchen felt different tonight, charged with an energy I wasn't accustomed to. Instead of the usual dynamic where I felt like an afterthought, I was clearly the center of attention. "Tell us about Rodriguez Digital," my father said, returning to his cooking. "When did you know it was going to be successful?" "I'm not sure I ever knew for certain," I said honestly. Business growth happened gradually. One client referred another, positive results led to bigger projects, and before I knew it, I had more work than I could handle alone. "But you must have had a plan," my mother interjected. "You couldn't have built something this significant without strategic thinking." I had goals and timelines, but I also had to be flexible. The digital marketing industry changes constantly, so success required adapting to new platforms and technologies. My father nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking that builds lasting businesses. I wish I'd understood that about your work earlier." "Why didn't you ask?" I said, the question slipping out before I could stop it. My parents exchanged glances, and I saw my mother's face tighten with what looked like shame. "Because we made assumptions," she said quietly. "We saw that you were working from home, that you dressed casually, that you weren't following a traditional career path, and we assumed you were struggling. We thought we were being helpful," my father added, "suggesting more stable options, encouraging you to consider traditional employment. We didn't realize you were building something remarkable." "I tried to tell you," I said, my voice calm but firm, "multiple times. When I mentioned landing big clients, when I talked about hiring contractors, when I said I was considering office space. But those conversations always turned into suggestions about what I should be doing differently." "We heard what we expected to hear," my mother admitted. "We were so focused on Rebecca's conventional success that we couldn't see your unconventional achievement." The timer on the oven interrupted our conversation, and my father moved to check the roast he'd been preparing. The domestic scene felt surreal, my parents cooking for me while asking genuine questions about my work and acknowledging their mistakes. "The Morrison partnership," my father said as he carved the roast. "Harrison Mitchell doesn't offer exclusive contracts lightly. What convinced him to invest so heavily in Rodriguez Digital?" "Results," I said simply. "We increased their qualified leads by 40% and helped them land over $15 million in new business. But I think the partnership offer was also about potential. They see Rodriguez Digital as a company that can grow with them." $15 million in new business, my mother repeated. From your marketing strategies? Digital marketing isn't just about social media posts and website design, I explained. It's about understanding target audiences, creating compelling content, optimizing conversion funnels, and measuring results across multiple channels. When done well, it drives real business growth. And you've been doing this for 3 years, my father said, shaking his head. Building expertise, serving clients, generating results, while we thought you were still figuring things out. We moved to the dining room where my mother had set the table with the good china that usually only appeared for holidays and special occasions. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. This meal was being treated as a celebration, the kind of recognition I'd never received before. There's something else we need to discuss, my mother said as we began eating. Rebecca told us about her behavior at the wedding, about what she said in her speech. She apologized to me privately, I said. We had a good conversation about it. But we need to apologize too, my father said, because her attitude toward you didn't develop in a vacuum. She learned that behavior from watching how we treated your achievements. The admission was more honest than I'd expected. My parents were acknowledging their role in creating the family dynamics that had made me feel invisible for years. We've been reflecting on specific incidents, my mother continued. Times when we dismissed your accomplishments or redirected conversations to Rebecca's success. We realize now how damaging that must have been. It was isolating, I admitted. I started keeping my professional life separate from family life because it was easier than constantly defending my choices. That's going to change, my father said with conviction. We want to be part of your success, to understand your business, to celebrate your achievements properly. Speaking of which, my mother said, standing to retrieve something from the kitchen counter. We have something for you. She returned with a wrapped package, placing it in front of me with a nervous smile. It's not much, but we wanted to acknowledge what we should have been celebrating all along. I unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a crystal award engraved with Jazmin Rodriguez, CEO Rodriguez Digital, in recognition of outstanding entrepreneurial achievement. Below that was inscribed the date and, from your proud parents, Robert and Susan Rodriguez. You had this made, I said, my voice catching slightly. We wanted you to have something tangible that recognized your success, my mother explained. Something that showed how proud we are of what you've built. I held the award in my hands, feeling its weight. It was a beautiful piece, clearly expensive, but more importantly, it represented recognition I'd never received from my family. There's more, my father said. We'd like to hire Rodriguez Digital to handle the marketing for my dental practice. A proper business arrangement, with contracts and everything. Dad, you don't have to do that just because you feel guilty. I'm not doing it because I feel guilty, he said. I'm doing it because I've been researching digital marketing for dental practices, and Rodriguez Digital has the exact expertise I need. Plus, I'd rather give my business to my daughter than to some stranger. The offer was touching, but I also recognized the potential complications of mixing family and business relationships. Let me think about it, I said. If we do this, it would have to be a completely professional arrangement. No family discounts, no special treatment, no complaints if I recommend strategies you don't immediately understand. Agreed, my father said immediately. I want Rodriguez Digital's professional expertise, not family favors. As we finished dinner, the conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. My parents asked detailed questions about my business model, my growth plans, my thoughts on industry trends. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like they saw me as a competent professional, rather than a daughter who needed guidance. The Entrepreneur of the Year award, my mother said as we moved to the living room for coffee. When is the ceremony? December 15th. It's a dinner event at the Phoenician. We'd like to attend, she said, as your guests, to support you properly. You want to come to the awards ceremony? We want to be there when you win, my father said with confidence. Because based on what we've learned about Rodriguez Digital this week, I can't imagine you not winning. The evening continued with my parents asking about my moving plans, my team expansion, my relationship with Alex. They wanted to understand not just my business but my life, the complete picture of who I'd become, while they weren't paying attention. As I prepared to leave, my mother walked me to the door while my father cleaned up the kitchen. "Jazmin, I need to ask you something personal," she said. "Are you happy? With your life, your work, your choices?" "I am," I said. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living authentically, building something meaningful." "I'm glad," she said, her eyes becoming teary. "I'm sorry it took us so long to see what was right in front of us." "What matters is that you see it now," I said, meaning it. "We love you," she said, pulling me into another long hug. "We're proud of you, and we're excited to watch Rodriguez Digital continue to grow." As I drove home through the Phoenix night, I reflected on how dramatically my family relationships had shifted in just 1 week. The conversation tonight had been everything I'd hoped for but never expected. Genuine recognition, authentic pride, and a commitment to building better relationships moving forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How did dinner go?" Mom texted that it was wonderful. I smiled, typing back, "It was good, really good. Thank you for encouraging them to reach out. You deserve recognition for everything you've accomplished. I'm sorry it took us so long to give it to you." The response felt like the final piece of a puzzle that had been incomplete for years. My family finally saw me as I was, not as they'd assumed I should be. The woman who had hidden her success to avoid conflict was gone, replaced by someone who claimed her achievements and demanded recognition for her work. Monday would bring the public announcement of the Morrison partnership, media interviews, and the beginning of Rodriguez Digital's transformation into a major Phoenix business. But tonight I was content to savor the knowledge that I was finally living without apology, surrounded by people who were beginning to understand my worth. The breakthrough had happened not in a boardroom or at a networking event, but around my parents' dining room table, where honest conversations had finally replaced years of misunderstanding. Success felt even sweeter when it was shared with people who truly appreciated the journey it had taken to achieve it. December 15th arrived with the kind of desert evening that made Phoenix feel like the most beautiful place on earth. I stood in my new office on the 28th floor of the Morrison building, adjusting the sleeves of my midnight blue gown while watching the city lights twinkle below. The space was everything I'd dreamed of when I first started Rodriguez Digital, from my kitchen table, floor-to-ceiling windows, conference rooms with state-of-the-art technology, and enough space for a team that had grown to 18 employees in just 2 months. Alex appeared in the doorway, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. He'd moved to Phoenix 6 weeks ago, and had already found his rhythm in the city, landing a position with a tech startup that was revolutionizing mobile gaming. More importantly, he'd found his place in my life as we navigated this new chapter together. "Ready for your big night?" he asked, crossing the office to straighten my necklace, a simple diamond pendant that had belonged to my grandmother. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, though my stomach was fluttering with nervous excitement. Tonight was the Phoenix Business Journal's annual awards ceremony, where the Entrepreneur of the Year would be announced. The other nominees were impressive: a tech CEO who'd sold his company for $200 million, a restaurateur who'd built an empire of farm-to-table establishments, and a woman who'd revolutionized sustainable packaging for major corporations. "Your parents are probably already at the Phoenician," Alex said, checking his watch. "Your dad texted that they're excited to celebrate with you." The relationship with my parents had transformed completely over the past 3 months. My father had indeed hired Rodriguez Digital to revamp his dental practice's marketing, and our professional relationship had been a revelation for both of us. He'd discovered that his daughter was not only competent but innovative, while I'd learned that he was actually a thoughtful business owner who'd simply never understood digital marketing. The campaign we'd developed for his practice had exceeded every expectation, bringing in 30% more new patients and establishing his practice as the premier dental office in North Scottsdale. More importantly, our weekly strategy meetings had become genuine conversations about business, life, and family. My mother had thrown herself into understanding my work with the same intensity she'd once applied to supporting Rebecca's academic achievements. She'd read every article about digital marketing she could find, attended a Rodriguez Digital client presentation, and even started offering strategic suggestions that were surprisingly insightful. "Rebecca called while you were getting ready," Alex said. "She wanted to wish you luck tonight." My relationship with Rebecca had evolved into something I'd never expected: genuine friendship. She'd eventually been moved back to client-facing work at Morrison after proving she could separate her professional judgment from personal feelings. We now had lunch regularly, conversations that ranged from business strategy to relationship advice, with none of the competitive undercurrents that had poisoned our interactions for years. "Did she say anything about the partnership announcement?" I asked. "She said Harrison Mitchell has been bragging about Rodriguez Digital to everyone who'll listen. Apparently, your team's work has made Morrison the most progressive firm in Arizona when it comes to digital client engagement." The Morrison partnership had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. In 3 months, we'd helped the firm secure over $30 million in new business, revolutionize their client communication systems, and establish them as thought leaders in legal technology. The success had generated inquiries from law firms across the Southwest, all wanting to replicate Morrison's digital transformation. We made our way to the parking garage, where my new car waited. I'd finally traded in my modest sedan for something that reflected my success: a sleek BMW that made me feel like the successful businesswoman I'd become. It was a small symbol of how much had changed, but an important one. The Phoenician resort looked like something from a fairy tale, its grounds illuminated by thousands of twinkling lights. As we walked through the lobby toward the ballroom, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished marble walls. The woman looking back at me was confident, successful, and comfortable in her own skin. She bore little resemblance to the person who'd sat at table 12 at Rebecca's wedding, trying to make herself invisible. Inside the ballroom, I spotted my parents immediately. My father was wearing his best suit, the one he'd bought for Rebecca's wedding, while my mother looked elegant in a deep purple gown. They were chatting with other guests, and I could see the pride in their faces as they introduced themselves as Jazmin Rodriguez's parents. "There she is," my mother said as we approached, pulling me into a careful hug that wouldn't disturb my hair. "You look absolutely stunning." "You clean up pretty well yourself," I said, squeezing her hand. "We're so proud of you," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Win or lose tonight, you've already achieved something remarkable." The ceremony began with cocktails and networking, followed by dinner and the awards presentation. I found myself seated at a table with other nominees and their families, engaged in conversations about business growth, market challenges, and industry trends. These were my peers now, successful entrepreneurs who understood the unique challenges of building something from nothing. When the Entrepreneur of the Year category was announced, I felt my heart rate increase. The presenter read through each nominee's achievements, and hearing my own accomplishments listed alongside such impressive company was almost surreal. 3 years ago, I'd been a woman working from her kitchen table, hoping to book enough clients to pay rent. Now I was being recognized alongside Arizona's most successful business leaders. And the winner of this year's Entrepreneur of the Year award is, the presenter paused for dramatic effect, Jazmin Rodriguez, CEO of Rodriguez Digital. The ballroom erupted in applause as I stood, my legs suddenly unsteady. Alex kissed my cheek, my parents beamed from their seats, and I made my way to the stage in a daze. The Crystal Award was heavier than I'd expected, its surface catching the stage lights as I accepted it. "Thank you," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 years ago, I started Rodriguez Digital with nothing but a laptop and a belief that small businesses deserve the same quality marketing that major corporations received. Tonight, I'm honored to accept this award not just for myself but for every entrepreneur who's ever been told their dreams were too risky, too unconventional, or too ambitious. I paused, looking out at the crowd until I found my family's faces. To my parents, who taught me that success comes in many forms, and to my sister, who showed me that competition can transform into collaboration. To my team at Rodriguez Digital, who've helped build something far greater than I ever imagined alone. And to everyone who's ever felt like they had to hide their achievements to avoid making others uncomfortable, your success is not something to apologize for. It's something to celebrate. The applause was thunderous as I left the stage, award in hand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, photos, and conversations with other business leaders who wanted to understand how Rodriguez Digital had achieved such rapid growth. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the resort's terrace with Alex, looking out over the Valley of the Sun. The city lights stretched to the horizon, a reminder of how far I'd come from that studio apartment where I'd started this journey. "How does it feel?" Alex asked, his arm around my waist as we watched the late-night traffic move through the city below. "Surreal," I admitted. "But also right. Like everything that happened before was preparing me for this moment." "Including your sister's wedding?" I laughed, remembering that evening that had started this transformation. Especially the wedding. If Rebecca hadn't called me a pathetic loser in front of Harrison Mitchell, none of this might have happened. "Sometimes the worst moments create the best opportunities," Alex observed. "The best part isn't the award or the recognition," I said, leaning into his warmth. "It's knowing that I finally have the family relationships I always wanted. My parents see me for who I am, Rebecca and I are actually friends, and you're here sharing it all with me." "Speaking of sharing," Alex said, pulling back to look at me, "I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught as he dropped to one knee on the terrace, the Phoenix skyline providing a backdrop that was uniquely ours. "Jazmin Rodriguez, you've built an empire, earned recognition from your peers, and transformed your family relationships. You've shown me what it means to live authentically and pursue your dreams without apology. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, a simple solitaire that caught the light from the resort's landscape illumination. But more perfect was the man offering it, someone who'd believed in me when I was still learning to believe in myself. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Absolutely yes." As Alex slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the kitchen table where I'd started Rodriguez Digital, to the stage where I'd accepted the Entrepreneur of the Year award, from the family dinners where I'd felt invisible, to the terrace where I was being asked to start a new chapter. The woman who'd hidden her success to avoid conflict was gone, replaced by someone who claimed her achievements and shared them with people who truly appreciated the journey. Rodriguez Digital would continue to grow, my family relationships would deepen, and Alex and I would build a life together that honored both our ambitions and our love. But tonight, standing on that terrace with my fiancé and my award, surrounded by the city that had become the backdrop for my success, I was simply grateful. Grateful for the courage to start something from nothing. Grateful for the family who'd finally learned to see me clearly, and grateful for the future that stretched ahead, bright with possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.